300,000 years ago, the world was a very different place. Across vast grasslands, early humans lived surrounded by nature and uncertainty. Every footprint could reveal where food, danger, or another creature had passed. Survival depended on watching carefully and knowing when to stay hidden. Finding enough food was one of the greatest challenges of everyday life. Rivers were precious, providing the water that every human needed to survive. But nature could change quickly, and dark clouds often brought powerful storms. When the rain arrived, the safest place was often a simple rocky shelter. Inside the cave, the group could escape the cold, wind, and heavy rain. They collected dry branches, discovering that wood could become more than fuel. Fire provided warmth, light, and protection during the long prehistoric nights. But early humans also needed tools to make their difficult world easier. By striking stones together, they slowly learned to create sharper edges. These simple tools helped them cut branches and work with the natural world. Branches and leaves could also be transformed into simple temporary shelters. Step by step, humans were learning how to shape their environment. And survival became easier when people worked together as a group. Together, they could travel farther and search for better places to live. They constantly watched the ground for signs of animals and other dangers. At sunset, the group gathered around the fire and shared what they had found. But humans were beginning to do something more than simply survive. Inside caves, they began creating marks and drawings using natural pigments. These early images became a remarkable record of prehistoric human life. As seasons changed, groups sometimes traveled across enormous landscapes. A fertile valley with water, plants, and shelter could become a promising home. The group searched carefully for places where they could find everything they needed. They began building shelters close to water and important food sources. Slowly, scattered families began forming small communities. This was one of the earliest steps toward organized human settlement. And this was only the beginning of humanity's long journey towards civilization. The journey continued, as the group returned to their small settlement. There, everyone worked together to prepare the food they had gathered. But food was never guaranteed, so the search continued every single day. Near the river, wild plants provided another valuable source of nourishment. Beneath the clear water, the group noticed another possible source of food. They began experimenting with simple wooden tools to reach what the river offered. Patience was essential, because every mistake could mean losing precious food. Eventually, the caveman returned to the settlement with what he had collected. The group gathered around the fire and carefully prepared their food. Sharing food strengthened the bonds that held the small community together. Then, something in the distant grassland caught their attention. Wild animals moved across the horizon, reminding everyone how vulnerable they were. The group calmly moved closer to the safety of their shelters. As darkness approached, they gathered together inside the largest shelter. Outside, the night became quiet as a small fire continued to burn. Above them, countless stars filled the ancient night sky. The next morning brought a new discovery: fresh tracks near the settlement. The caveman followed the tracks carefully, searching for clues about the animal. Along the way, he discovered a natural rock formation with a sheltered space. He returned to the group and showed them what he had found. Together, they traveled toward the new shelter to investigate it. The rocky shelter offered protection from weather and a safer place to rest. The group began collecting branches and leaves from the surrounding landscape. Working together, they cleared the ground and prepared their new shelter. Dry grass and leaves were arranged to create a simple sleeping area. For the group, even a simple shelter could make survival much easier. From the entrance, the caveman noticed a promising river valley nearby. The group decided to explore the valley and see what it could provide. Water, plants, and open land made the valley an attractive place to live. And once again, humans were searching for a place they could finally call home. The valley looked promising, so the group began exploring every corner of it. Near the river, they discovered rich, soft soil that could provide valuable plants. Wild plants and roots were plentiful, giving the group another source of food. Even the birds revealed where water and food could be found. Following the river, the group continued searching for the perfect place to stay. Then they discovered something important, a natural spring between the rocks. Fresh water made the valley even more valuable for the growing group. The caveman noticed a wide, flat area that could support a new settlement. The group moved toward it, carrying the materials they would need. They had found a place where they could begin building a new home. The first task was gathering strong branches from the nearby trees. Together, they arranged the branches to create the frame of a shelter. Others gathered leaves and grass to cover the wooden structure. Layer by layer, the simple shelter began protecting them from the elements. Soon, several shelters stood beside the river. The group also created a safe stone circle where they could maintain a fire. Dry grass and small branches were carefully prepared for the flames. Once the fire was burning, everyone gathered around it for warmth and light. Firelight also made it easier to work with tools after sunset. That night, the new settlement rested beneath a sky filled with stars. The following morning brought another discovery along the riverbank. Fresh animal tracks crossed the soft ground, leading toward the grassland. The caveman followed them until he spotted animals grazing in the distance. He returned and showed the group where those animals could be found. The group prepared their simple tools before exploring the grassland. Together, they traveled across the open land, carefully observing their surroundings. Behind a large rock, they studied the animals and learned how they moved. Knowing the landscape helped them choose safer routes through the wilderness. As the sun set, the group returned to their growing settlement. What began as a temporary camp was slowly becoming a true prehistoric community. Another day began, and the settlement slowly came alive beneath the morning sun. The river had become essential to almost everything the community did. Water, food, and shelter were all within reach, making life more secure. The group continued searching the riverbank for useful plants and roots. The caveman discovered a rich patch of vegetation and showed the others where to gather. Working together, they carried the food back to their growing settlement. The gathered food was carefully organized near the community's fire. Sharing food became an important part of life within the small community. But the peaceful morning suddenly changed when dark clouds appeared. Strong winds arrived, forcing everyone to prepare their fragile shelters. Rain began falling, and the group quickly moved inside for protection. Heavy rain covered the valley while the community waited safely indoors. Inside the shelter, cooperation helped everyone remain calm during the storm. Eventually, the clouds disappeared and sunlight returned to the valley. After the storm, the caveman explored the transformed riverbank. The rain had brought new growth, revealing fresh possibilities for the community. The caveman began wondering whether useful plants could be grown near their home. The others watched closely as he prepared a small patch of soil. Together, they cleared the ground using simple stone and wooden tools. For the first time, they placed selected seeds into the prepared earth. Days passed, and tiny green plants began emerging from the soil. The community carefully protected the young plants from damage. Water from the river was carried to the growing plants. Everyone helped, turning a simple experiment into a shared effort. Slowly, the settlement became more organized and increasingly self-sufficient. The caveman looked across the growing settlement with a sense of achievement. More shelters appeared as the community continued to grow. What was once a temporary camp had become a small organized settlement. At sunset, the entire community gathered around their shelters and fires. From the hill, the caveman watched his community grow, marking another step in humanity's long journey towards civilization. The caveman returned to the settlement as another day began beside the river. The community was growing, and everyone had new responsibilities. The young plants were becoming stronger, giving the people hope for a more reliable food supply. They began learning which plants were useful and which ones should be avoided. Water remained essential, so the group developed a simple routine for carrying it from the river. Working together made these daily tasks easier and faster. The caveman carefully watered the growing plants and watched their progress. Around him, the settlement was slowly becoming more organized. Then, something unexpected appeared across the valley. Another small group of humans was approaching their settlement. At first, everyone watched carefully, unsure of who the newcomers were. Slowly, the two groups came closer and began communicating through simple gestures. The caveman showed them the river, the shelters, and the food growing nearby. Instead of conflict, the groups began sharing what they had. The newcomers joined the community's daily work. Together, they collected branches and prepared materials for another shelter. The growing population meant that more space was needed. The caveman helped build a new shelter beside the others. Large leaves and dry grass were placed over the wooden frame. Soon, the settlement had become larger than ever before. Different people began taking responsibility for different tasks. Some gathered food, while others built shelters or prepared tools. That night, the caveman sat beside the fire and looked across the peaceful community. Above him, the stars filled the ancient sky, while the settlement rested beneath them. Humanity was still far from civilization, but the foundations of community life were already beginning to appear.